here and we'll get started. Thanks, everyone. All right. Perfect. Thanks, everyone who's joining. We're so excited to see students joining the call. We're excited for our conversation today. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Cassie Petoskey and I use she or they pronouns. And I am the director of the Waldron Student Alumni Connections Program, where our goal really is to help you all explore career options through connecting with alumni. And of course, we're so excited to hear from our alumni speakers today more on biotech and pharma. We'll have prepared questions from our student moderators for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll open up the session to questions from you all. So students who are on the line today, start thinking about what questions you might want to ask. If you want to turn your mic and camera on to ask your question, you can submit that through the public chat and Samira will call on you to turn on your mic and ask that, since we'll have a pretty big call here today. And if you'd like for someone else to read your question, if you want Samira to read that out to our panelists, you can send that in to Samira through a private chat or directly to me, and we'll make sure we get your question answered. And of course, as always, we totally understand that students who are joining the call are on the move, you all are busy, but we always like to encourage students to turn on your cameras if you're comfortable doing so. The connections will be strongest when our alumni can kind of put that face to a name. So we encourage you all to do that. And of course, I just want to share a little bit about a key campus partner of ours, Northwestern Career Advancement. Northwestern Career Advancement is another great tool and resource to you all in your career exploration process, whether you are exploring what you might want to do, or if you're further along and you're looking for that job and resume help. NCA is a great place. Laura Drosty is on the call today, and we can send in links if people want to connect further with NCA. I just wanted to make sure that I had a shout out to that campus partner for you all as another resource. So Karina, I'm going to pass it over to you to kind of take over from here, moderating the conversation. Thank you, Karina and Samira, for being our student moderators, and take it away from here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cassie. Welcome everyone to our panel today. I'm really excited to introduce you all to our wonderful panelists, and hopefully you can learn a lot about the biotech and pharma industry and kind of get some of your questions answered. So my name is Prina. I'm a third-year undergraduate student at Northwestern, majoring in neuroscience. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here today. We can go ahead and just do quick introductions from everyone and then get started.
Yeah, I'll go next really quick. I'll help field questions at the end. If you guys want to send any in, we can go and answer them at the end. I'm Samara. I'm majoring in chemistry and I'm a second here at Northwestern, and I'm super excited to be on the call today.
I'm happy to go next. I'm Sheila Gujarati. I attended the Northwestern 7-year honors program in medical education, HPME, many years ago. And for my undergraduate, I did a degree in biomedical engineering at the McCormick School of Engineering at the time. And then I went on to go get my MD downtown at the Feinberg School of Medicine. And after that, I went really into a clinical training for my MD. I trained in internal medicine at the Brigham Women's Hospital at Harvard and Boston. I did my fellowship at UCSF in Stanford. In allergy, immunology, rheumatology. And then I did have a big pivot point, which we can talk about later, where I left medicine, became a consultant at McKinsey with some of our other panelists here today. Spent a few years really consulting for large pharmaceutical companies. After that, decided to go into biotech, moved back to the Bay Area, and then I was at Genentech, a large biotech company, for a number of years. And then I ran immunology at a large global pharma company called Bristol Myers Squibb. And then after about 15 years ago, I pivoted to small companies. I was a chief medical officer of a company called Receptos, which I took public and we sold to Celgene. And then I was a co-founder and CEO of another company, Gossamer Bio. And for the last several years, I've been co-founding companies, stepping into director roles, board chair roles, advisor roles. So thrilled to talk to you all today and happy to answer any questions you may have.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sheila. Dan, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. My name's Dan Siegel. I graduated in 1992. I got a degree in physics after Northwestern. I went on to get a PhD in physics out at Stanford. If we come back to pivots of careers later, I had a career pivot after at the tail end of graduate school. Did what I might call three odd jobs with mostly with startup companies. Over 2 years, went back to business school, and then after business school, joined McKinsey. Was there for about 6 years, and then made the move to pharma with Novartis.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. Sepan, want to intro us?
Hey everybody, Sapan Shah here, a Northwestern class of 1993. I graduated from the Integrated Science Program. I don't know if there are any other ISPers on the call. Had a profound impact on me going forward. So always happy to connect with ISPers. I combine an ISP with degrees in mathematics and biochemistry, molecular biology, and cell biology. I did not know what I wanted to do after undergrad. So to make anybody feel better on the call, I did not have really anything planned out. I think I went to graduate school because I wanted to avoid working in some ways. And so and I loved research. So ended up going to Yale, getting my PhD in molecular biophysics and biochemistry. Really enjoyed sort of what was going on there in the structural biology world, and really got introduced to a lot of the applications of that on the therapeutic side of things. Wanted to learn about business, didn't quite know how to do that, so ended up joining McKinsey & Company, like Sheila and Dan. We were joking on the pre-call, you don't have to join McKinsey & Company to enter the pharma industry, but we certainly went down that path. Had a great experience there, just learning about the business of pharmaceuticals and biotech. Was then hired by one of my clients to be CEO of their US business. Did that for about a decade, developing a number of drugs, including in the HIV area. After building a large sales force and sort of doing that for a while, wanted to pivot back into small early stage biotech, sort of higher risk, closer to the science. And so for the past decade or so, I've been leading early stage companies. I think I'm on my 6th or 7th one. Currently CEO of Glycine Therapeutics, focused on type 2 diabetes and obesity, but have just really enjoyed this career. Was not planned. A lot of pivots, but just a phenomenal place to be. I think in the industry, we're lucky to have such a noble mission of developing drugs to help patients. It sort of aligns everyone. It's our North Star. And it's just a really great place to be with phenomenal people. So happy to get into a discussion about it and help you guys along your journey if we can. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sepan. Yeah, we're really excited to hear from you. And then last but not least, Reka, do you want to share your introduction?
Yeah, will do. Thank you. It's great to meet you all. It's always invigorating to see Wildcats. So I am actually a little bit different than the other three panelists in that I did not go to Northwestern undergrad, but I did go to Kellogg. And I came to the US as an international student to attend Kellogg. I had worked in India, where I'm from, in a young pharmaceutical company, and had worked actually on pediatric endocrinology products. And I think that really informed my excitement and passion for the space. After Kellogg, I actually ended up deciding to go into investment banking. I didn't go to McKinsey. I went to investment banking. I was at Credit Suisse First Boston, focusing on healthcare clients, though. So the role of investment banks, as you know, is to help companies raise money as well as do mergers and acquisitions types of transactions. So I sort of cut my teeth at learning that part of the business at two investment banks. But then I did make a pivot, and we can talk more about pivots, and went back into mid-sized biopharma companies, such as a company called Exelixis and Onyx in the San Francisco Bay Area, that are focused in oncology. And my role there was more in business development, licensing, and M&A. And after doing that for 15 plus years, I actually pivoted into a chief financial officer role at biotech companies, and then was chief executive officer of a couple of companies, and then have now pivoted into a portfolio of board roles. I'm on the board of 3 public biotech companies and also do a little bit of advisory work. So multiple pivots. One other theme that I sort of didn't mention, but has been part of my career along the way, is working a little bit in global health and affordable health. So a couple of times in my career, I've tried to either create or help investment firms with how to make innovation affordable into countries like India. And so we can talk a little bit more about that as well. Great to be here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. So I guess we're gonna go ahead and just jump right into the first question. And this is mostly focused on like your Northwestern experience and kind of like coming right out of Northwestern. Maybe if you could share with us some of the impactful classes or experiences you had at Northwestern, and then how they influenced the beginning of your career. And then Sheila, maybe we can start with you and just kind of like go the same order. Perfect.
Yeah, happy to kick it off. I would say for me, which, one of the aspects when I was looking at different opportunities for my undergraduate training was I was very focused on being pre-med and becoming a physician. So that was my track. So like Sapan saying, he didn't really know what he wanted to do. I was kind of told I was going to be a doctor, and that was what I was pursuing. I actually speak about this. I gave the commencement speech at the McCormick School of Engineering this really last summer. So if anyone wants to see that, I talk a lot about my journey, kind of breaking free of some conditioning I had, familial conditioning, to find my true voice and my true path. But one thing I'm incredibly grateful about in joining the HPME program was that I pursued a very, I thought, challenging degree in my undergraduate, which was biomedical engineering at the McCormick School of Engineering, even though I didn't have an intention to be an engineer after my undergraduate training. But what it did for me is that when I took, very challenging class after very challenging class, because I was really taking all my engineering core requirements in the first 3 years, and I took a very challenging honors math course my entire freshman year. It was, incredibly challenging, and with an amazing group of students. It just prepared me for life. I think it just made me such a great analytical thinker and such a good problem solver. And it just taught me how, just the finesse of understanding how to break down problems, how to solve them, and actually how not to be intimidated by anything, because I developed this confidence that I could solve any problem that came my way, or, or at least seek help as well. But it gave me such a great set of tools, and, from an analytical communication, and just, presentation as well. And that when I came out of my medical training, which was another set of training, and I can talk a little bit about like what you learn, in the medical track, because you also get an excellent training in general about how to, assimilate large amounts of information very quickly and come to, hypotheses, the differential diagnosis, and move forward. Again, in a lot of leadership, there's a lot that you learn while you're becoming a physician. But that engineering background, I think, really allowed me to have the courage to leave medicine and go into consulting and beyond. And I think, it also gave me, I think, a lot of strategic skills. And these are the components of what I use every day in my life. Regardless of whatever role I'm playing, I have that confidence, and I know I can, again, figure out anything that's thrown at me. And I think that is so valuable. So I would encourage all of you, when you're taking classes, even if I would definitely pursue your passion, whatever you're interested in, drawn to. I think that's really important. But also know that nothing is wasted. Everything that you're doing and how you're challenging yourself to grow as a thinker, as a doer, will play out in your career. And just continue to bring your best self forward, and again, continue to challenge yourself. Take those, don't shy away from taking difficult classes, or, some things that you don't exactly know, how that would fit into your career, because that one class could be something that starts an entire other journey. As you hear from all of us, we've all pivoted. That's one thing I see very commonly with any professional I speak to today. There was at some point they made some changes in their career. So that's, I think, fully to be expected. And you should go in eyes wide open, knowing that you're going to basically be changing the path in your journey. But take those hard classes and really build up your skill sets. That I think has been the most rewarding and really fulfilling aspect in my career as I continue to challenge myself to grow. And I keep changing jobs and roles. And they say you're supposed to reinvent yourself every 7 years. I think in this day and age, it's even more frequently than that. And all of you are going to be facing a lot of different dynamic changes in our professional world as you're setting forward in your career. So be ready for that.
Yeah, thank you. And it's really incredible to hear how like you were on a set track and then somehow you still managed to kind of deviate from that and like pivot later on, despite being told what your next 7 years was going to encompass. So that's really interesting. Yeah, Dan, would you like to share?
Sure. So I think there's three things that come to mind from my undergraduate experience. So first, to build on what Sapan said, I had no idea what I was going to do when I went to Northwestern. I thought I was going to become a political science major. And then Sheila's comment of one class can change your life is my first example. So in my freshman year, I took a physics, electricity, and magnetism course. I failed the first two quizzes. I was nervous that I was going to fail the class. And I decided to not embarrass myself. I should study really hard. And in the process of doing that, I realized I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the problem-solving nature of physics. And that led me to major in the subject at Northwestern. The second was, from my experience at Northwestern, were research experiences. So I spent my summers generally working in a research lab. And so and also my honors thesis, and this gave me an idea for what hands-on science was like and whether I might like doing that in graduate school. And then I think the third thing that really stuck with me from undergraduate was my experiences with upperclassmen. So people, getting to know people that were older than me or ahead of me at Northwestern, and seeing, when I was a freshman or a sophomore, what they were kind of thinking about in terms of a junior or a senior in terms of careers. And then when I became a junior and senior, kind of seeing them, what they were doing, and kind of using them as almost role models or examples of what was possible. So those are kind of the three things I took away from undergraduate.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. One class can change your life. So thanks, Dan. Stepan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Happy to go here. For me, as I alluded to in the opening comments, the integrated science program just had a huge impact on me as an undergraduate at Northwestern. So I was a kind of a math science focused person in high school. And as I was looking for places to go to pursue that interest, came across ISP. And for those that are not familiar, like the entire concept of the integrated science program is that traditionally the physical sciences are taught in silos. So you have chemistry, mathematics, biology. You're forced to focus on one or the other. And sort of, if you have an interest, just sort of deep dive on that. But in reality, in academia, as well as in pharma and biotech, all of the interesting things happen at the interfaces between those silos. And so the whole point of ISP was to integrate those disciplines in a way that really opened up your thinking. You would learn a concept in mathematics, and the next hour apply that to the motions of atoms in chemistry, and the next hour apply those same functions to planetary movements in physics. And so you just sort of saw connections across things. And that really had a huge impact on me, that to this day, I always think of myself as not one thing, and that I'm always looking for sort of connections that come across disciplines. And I think as a biotech CEO as well, you're curating people from a number of different disciplines. The things that have to happen for a drug to go from discovery stage to approval requires so many different points of view and functions. And I've always felt like I sort of have the ability to see across that because of how I was sort of trained as an undergraduate. And that influenced what I pursued as a PhD. Sheila, like you, I was told to go to medical school, but I rebelled by getting a PhD. in biophysics and biochemistry. My parents still don't forgive me for that, by the way. But I've done okay. But that choice too was to try to pursue a track where it really cut across disciplines, the applications of physical techniques to biology and all the different things that can come from that. And so, I've always taken the view that, you don't have to be one thing. You can sort of have varied interests, and a lot of the interesting things that happen in your life are because when those things intersect. So as an undergraduate, as you guys think about what you want to do, just know that, as Sheila said, and Dan as well, like, there's not one path to take, but everything that you do, you're sort of building that database of experiences that you can then apply to whatever you do next. And I certainly have felt everything that I've done along the way, starting as an undergraduate, has sort of informed that moving forward. So just have a lot of appreciation and hindsight for that experience at Northwestern. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Rika, do you have any insights?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, for me, since I was at business school, I came into business school really not knowing what I was going to do. But I did take, I remember one class that was very hard and was sort of formative for me to think about investment banking, and that was financial decisions. It was really about corporate finance decisions with case-based study. And, and I had also, of course, taken marketing classes, and I was struck by how qualitative financial decisions were and how quantitative marketing decisions were, right? And it really sort of was, a paradigm shift in my mind that, it's not just all about the numbers, and there's clearly a lot of decisions that are not clear and qualitative and nuanced. And I started to really love understanding that some more. So, I decided to go into investment banking to try it out, frankly. And then I ended up staying for a long time. And I think I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, in terms of advice, I guess, one of the things I would say is, get to know good people who will guide you, sort of create your own personal board of directors along the way, if you can, right? People who know you from different contexts of life, who understand you, who will give you honest feedback, who have your back. And, hang out with those good people in your life. And that will really help you get anywhere you want eventually. And then, of course, follow your heart. But if you have people who, Sheila talks about mirrors, right? And you'll hear more about mirrors when you look at her, when you hear her TED talk. These are going to be the mirrors in your life, and people who will, call your BS and guide you and tell you and push you to go higher. And so continue to think about putting that together in your life.
Thank you. Yes, that's really great advice. And that actually segues perfectly into our next question, which kind of deals with what are you guys doing right now, and how does your work, or what does your work entail? What does it involve? So I guess I can say the official question really quickly, which is, can you give us a quick overview of your industry and also your job function? So it doesn't have to be super extensive, just kind of explaining to everyone what you kind of do on a daily basis.
Great. Should we change it up? Maybe Dan, do you want to go first, and we can rotate?
Sure.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
So I'd worked for a long time at Novartis. My last job before I retired early from Novartis was working as a global head of new products for the respiratory and allergy franchise. And in terms of the things that I focused on in that role, was the first is I led a team that was responsible for building the early to mid-stage pipeline in our franchise. And I work quite extensively with people across the gamut, with research people, with development people, with people on the commercial side of the business, people in the countries, business development colleagues, et cetera. So it was actually a great opportunity to kind of interface and collaborate with quite a diverse set of people, not only their experiences and expertise, but also kind of where they came from around the world. And then the second was driving the development of the overall franchise strategy, working with our major country organizations and global colleagues. So it's really setting a vision for where we wanted to be in, say, 5 or 10 years, and what we needed to do today to help get us there.
For sure. Yeah, Sapan, you want to and
Yeah.
bounce off that.
Sure. Yeah. So, my lane, as you will, right now is as a early stage biotech CEO. And so what I really enjoy about that is you have to wear a lot of hats. I usually come in at, the stage where a technology is coming out of an academic center. You're trying to marshal the right funding, the right people, selecting the right targets to go after, and sort of building a program to move forward. It requires understanding the science, the business, people. It's never boring. It's just a really exciting kind of role to have. And then on top of all of that, you're doing something really noble. As I said up front, you're trying to develop a drug or a therapeutic that's going to help people at the end of the day. I just find that to be really rewarding. On the flip side, at the stage of companies that I typically work in, probably 90% of everything fails. I mean, that's just the reality. And so you're sort of on that backdrop, trying to be optimistic around the technology that you're developing, but knowing that it's a really high hurdle and a really high bar to be successful. But you're taking big shots at big problems. And, so it's a really interesting dynamic for those that are interested, happy to talk more about it. But just this idea of, working, trying to marshal people from across a lot of different functions together for one purpose, but knowing that you have a really tough chance at being successful, but you're doing it for a really good reason. So I really just enjoy that side of it. But yeah, that's sort of what I do on a daily basis. A lot of different things, a lot of hats, but trying to really advance things for the betterment of patients.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll go next, and I'll take a little bit of a different approach because I've sort of come from a corp dev finance background. I mean, our industry, biotech, biopharma, is somewhat different in the sense that it takes 7 to 10 years, right, to develop a product, and takes a few $1 billion to get a product from an idea all the way to the market. And that sort of leads to sort of, a variety of problems to solve vis-a-vis financing this whole endeavor. And as Sapan said, 90% of these things fail along the way, right? So what I feel like my role has been is to think about how do you find who's going to finance and take the risk in different slivers of the product development life cycle. You can get different sources of capital for early stage research versus for clinical stage work versus for commercial work, right? And to think about how do you find those sources of capital? How do you make sure they understand the science and the rewards of the product that you're developing? And that, and those sources of capital can come from partnerships with larger companies like Novartis, where Dan was, or it can come from venture capital investors. It can come from government grants. It can come from public investors. So really to think about that whole ecosystem and how to leverage that ecosystem to actually take innovation all the way to the market is sort of ultimately what I have to think about, what I think about in my job, and spend my time executing.
Yeah, from my perspective, I have a lot of overlap with what Dan and Sapan and Reka have said, especially at this stage in my career where I'm also an acting CEO of a few small biotechs and starting companies and trying to finance them and figure out the programs to take forward. But I thought I'd take a step back and just talk about my clinical background, because for those of you who may be interested in pursuing a path in medicine, or getting some type of clinical training, or as a scientist, like if you're thinking about being, a biologist or chemist and kind of coming forward as a research scientist, and through your academic training, for me, it was my internal medicine and my fellowship training. And then when I was in my fellowship, I was doing a lot of clinical research. That is all very translatable into industry. And if so I actually, when I think about my identity, I very much identify still as a physician, as a clinician. And so when I think about, what drives me and motivates me, it's still to be a physician taking care of patients and trying to safeguard their safety to make sure we do no harm as we take the, our Hippocratic oath to become a physician, but also try to, of course, develop therapeutics that will benefit patients and their families and make the lives of my fellow physicians easier to actually give them treatment options to take care of their patients. And when I look back at the last 25 plus years that I've been in the biotech pharma space, I'm amazed at how many drugs we've brought forward and how we've really transformed the treatment paradigm and changed the way the textbooks of medicine are written for so many disease areas. It just amazes me because, as Saban mentioned, we have a very, very high failure rate. And so when you think about, how much failure we face in our industry and how resilient we have to be, it's still so gratifying to develop therapies that are actively being used to take care of patients and get their disease under control or even into remission, or potential cures, although that's still, far away from us at this time, but that's really what we're striving for. So when I talk to many research scientists or clinicians or people who are in academic medicine or community medicine, I'm always encouraging them to say, you can always transfer your skill sets into industry, and what you're doing at the bench or in your clinic or even in your clinical research in your academic setting, you can take that and apply that within a company. And so you do have to learn a different set of skills to basically, think about the corporate goals and objectives and make sure you're marrying your research objectives to try to drive value, to enable financings that Rekha is talking about, and partner with the business individuals who are running your company, whether that's the executive management or your finance function. You have to learn a lot about that, but you can still be a scientist at heart and a clinician at heart and go into biotech and pharma. And so I just wanted to maybe share that with you. So I did that. Obviously, I went into Genentech. I actually started in the commercial organization coming out of McKinsey, because at McKinsey you get such a great business background. So I was actually in the marketing organization, but I fell in love with R&D. So I did something that was also very atypical at the time. As a consultant, I went back into research and development, and I became the medical lead on programs and the development lead on programs, which again wasn't really what my McKinsey training was about. But I had so much strategic training, and I understood the business. I understood the commercial aspects of what we were trying to achieve, but my heart was in development. My heart was being a clinician. And so I was able to kind of, again, marry all these different and build upon all these different things I had learned, but kind of come back to my core identity, which is treating patients and helping patients live a better life. So I just wanted to share that with you to say, just you can take these steps, and you can, I think, still stay very congruent with what your ideals, goals, or what you're maybe studying even in the undergraduate space, but have a lot more impact sometimes in the corporate world because you have access to resource and finances, especially in large pharma companies, that you just don't have in the academic world. Not to diminish what the academic world is doing, incredibly important science, but sometimes you spend a lot of time writing, grants and trying to get research funding, and a lot of that is just given to you in big pharma.
Thank you. Yeah, and I noticed
big biotech or even small biotech, but just just any really corporate company.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I noticed a lot of you were all kind of talking about decision making that you face today in your career, and just like leading and having to make a lot of decisions based on financial decisions like Rekha mentioned, or even how Stepan was talking about like which hat to put on and how to engage with people or who can you talk to. So I think I kind of want to talk more about decision making in terms of like pivot. So was there an obstacle or pivot point that you had where you had to make a decision about your career path? And then how did you make that decision, and what did you learn about yourself from that choice? And then we can just start with Stepan and then keep going around.
You gave me the tough
Yeah.
one, Karina. No, yeah, I mean, there have been so many pivot points for me. I mean, if I think about some of the more significant ones, certainly after my PhD and sort of being on a track to perhaps go into academia and do research as a career, sort of pivoting into business was a big one, big decision, because oftentimes when you make kind of a path change like that, you can't go back. And certainly in academia, like if you want to be an academic researcher, if you take the business track, you probably can't go back. And so for me, it was just being really confident about that decision. And the way I approach most of these sort of forks in the road is just, am I going to learn something and expand my breadth of knowledge? And am I going to be better for that decision or not? And to sort of not get so hung up on what I won't be able to do if I take that choice, but what am I going to learn? And is this going to sort of keep me moving forward? And so I sort of do that calculation whenever I have these kind of options that I need to sort of weigh. But that was a big one, saying, okay, I'm not going to stay in academic research. But and part of it was I was not, like, I don't think I was a great academic researcher. And probably the reason for that made me a really good business person. And just I'll just talk about that for a second. I think to be a great academic researcher, you have to pick a single problem and spend, I don't know, the next year, 2 years, decade, your entire career sort of focused on that one specific problem, understanding it from all different angles, and sort of being the person that sort of focused on that. And I sort of was the type of person that I would kind of get a problem, get it sort of 80%, and then all of a sudden think about, oh, what are all the wonderful things you can do with that answer? And that made me not a great researcher. But it turns out in business, if you can get to, an 80% correct answer and sort of move forward with that in a very abbreviated time frame, that makes you really good at problem solving in business. And so that pivot actually fit very nicely with sort of my mentality, because I was always thinking about, oh, what's the application of this? I'm not sort of so interested in understanding this problem from every single angle and spending a decade doing that. But now that I know this much, wow, what are all the different applications and potential therapeutics you could generate based on that? And so it made sense at that time to pivot, but I did sort of have to think long and hard about what I was giving up in that moment, but it turned out to be fine. So don't know if that answers the question, but try to think through what you're going to be learning, what you're going to be gaining from that change. And, and as long as you're learning and progressing, you're going to be better off in your career.
For sure. Thank you, Sapan. Marika, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think very similar to Sapan's thought process of, at every pivot point, thinking about what you're gaining and what you're giving up. I mean, when I was going from investment banking into corporate jobs, it was actually, now people do that very often from investment banking to companies, but it was not common back then. It was actually not easy to do as well. I ended up consulting for a couple of companies, and a Kellogg alum took a chance on me to hire me. So, but when I was doing that, honestly, the reason I did it at the time is because I had my first child, who actually was a wildcat. But it was the lifestyle as an investment banker was absolutely brutal, and I felt like it was not going to be conducive with me being the kind of mother I wanted to be. And I struggled with that decision because I enjoyed my work, believe it or not, as an investment banker. I loved the diversity of companies I was involved in, the diversity of problems I was learning, and therapeutic areas I was learning about, etc. But I also felt that going in-house into a company would deepen my understanding of drug development and problems that my clients were facing, and would make me a much more credible executive, because I was not a scientist. I mean, that's the other thing. I think most of my other co-panelists are scientists. I was not, I didn't have a biology, medicine, background. And so I felt that that was sort of I wouldn't call it a PhD, but maybe my master's in at least understanding the drivers of drug development. So that's what made me decide to do that. And now when I'm kind of pivoting back into a portfolio, I feel like I have really benefited from having been inside those companies.
Thank you, Rekha. Sheila, you want to?
Yeah, I think a lot of common themes. What I think many of us did so many years ago, hopefully it's more accepted now, where there's like a more dynamic type of aspect to our careers. I think when we were growing up, it was like, when we looked at our parents' generation, you kind of picked one thing and you stuck with it. And I think so. I think a lot of us kind of had to break out of that mold. So I would say I want to touch upon like some of the things that I had to struggle with when I was making my decisions were really, dealing with the internal should, woulds, and coulds in my own mind that was secondary to a lot of conditioning. So I did have a lot of obstacles externally when I was thinking about leaving medicine. Obviously, my family was very unhappy with that type of decision. Like anytime I talked about leaving medicine, I was told that my education would not be paid for if I wasn't going to be a physician. So I had a lot of really significant pressure because I started recognizing even in my undergraduate days that maybe I didn't want to pursue medicine, and actually took a year off during medical school to really kind of take a step back and think about like what I want to do with my career. And then when I was in medicine, there was a lot of pressure to not leave medicine, especially during that time. Industry was considered the dark side. So, to really like, we have very altruistic motives within medicine, especially when you're training at excellent academic institutions. We call them like the ivory towers. So you're being told a lot of different things all the time from your mentors and your attendings and fellows and the people I was doing research with, and then of course my own family. So there's a lot coming at us all the time. And so kind of getting clear on that inner voice. And I talk a little bit about this in my talks, but spending time understanding what's really important to you, what's your inner voice and your gut telling you, what again gives you joy and excitement and passion, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to drive you to have a successful career and a fulfilling life. Is challenging sometimes. And I was told if I left medicine, I was screwing up my life. And what was I doing? And I was throwing away all of this training and the money I'd spent and, all these years, because I became a, full-fledged physician. I was in my 30s. And so, what was I doing? And so there was so much pressure. So I just, again, want to kind of relay that you have to understand what people are saying and take their advice. But at the end of the day, you have to listen to your own voice and make sure you're doing that. And then I would also say, many of us have taken the road less traveled, and that's okay as long as you're growing. And and an exercise I like to do is I do think about like if there are two decisions I have to make, or maybe three, and then I visualize myself. For example, like I would visualize myself staying in medicine and becoming an attending, and I would visualize myself doing other things. Sometimes it's hard to visualize it because that may be an unknown to you, but it's exciting, and that you're challenging yourself. And so like that I would visualize myself doing that, and I would say, I think I'm going to be happier down that route. So sometimes visualization really helps think through different options that you may have. Even when I was at Genentech again and going into the R&D side, again, no one at McKinsey did that. But again, that doesn't mean it's the wrong answer. So visualization, getting clear on your inner voice and just like listening to yourself, and just trying to find your passion and make it more simple for you, because there's a lot of variables that go into decision making. Try to make it simpler for you to make that decision.
Thank you, Sheila. Dan, for your
Yeah,
final words.
I'm happy to go next. So I'll build a little bit on Sapan's theme. So like the rest of the panelists, face various pivot points throughout my called morbid journey. It doesn't always seem like a path. I always think of a path as almost like a straight line, and I did not pursue a straight line. But mine was when I was coming out of graduate school. In graduate school, I loved what I was doing. I loved the research. I just didn't want to do it for a career. And when I was kind of finishing up my thesis, I was trying to think about, what do I at least I think I like to do at that point in time. What are my hunches? And so I studied, even though I was in a physics program, I was studying protein folding as a dissertation topic. And so it got me interested in the biosciences and kind of loosely interested in healthcare. And then also I had a growing interest in business, being out there at Stanford, some of my, actually Northwestern fellow students would cycle through the business school there. And so I would sit in some business school courses. And so I just had a growing interest in business. But honestly, I had no idea how to put those things together. And when you're leaving graduate school, unless you're going down the academic path, it's not like there's a whole bunch of recruiters always coming knocking on your door saying, come and do this. There might be an academic or in very small specific parts of industry. So I tried to chart my own path, which wasn't a straight line through this period of time. I worked through 3 companies in 2 years, doing kind of various roles. One was a very small boutique consulting company. This is back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So this was during the dot-com phase. So I worked in a startup in the business consumer space where the market, crashed and burned right before the company went public. Then I moved to another company that thankfully was funded by some very large companies, which was a good experience. But none of them were in healthcare. So then I went to business school. I got my MBA. And with that, what that enabled me to do is I could look at experiences in healthcare. I ended up going to McKinsey, but I also looked within pharma. And so one of the things also saying, kind of going through 3 jobs in 2 years, coming out of business school, it was a little bit of a hard story to kind of piece together. But each one of those experiences, good or bad, there was key learnings from each one. And so sometimes when you're going through experience, you might say, geez, did I make the right choice or did I make the wrong choice? And to a certain extent, I don't always think that there's right or wrong choices. There's things to learn from each thing that you're doing that helps you define a better path going forward. So that's a little bit about my pivot.
I really love that, Dan. I think that's so important. Like, it's okay. Like you learn and taking action, and then you learn and you decide that isn't for me. And that's incredibly valuable information. So I totally agree with that. And I've definitely, had to pivot early too. So I think it's just, but taking the steps and doing and challenging yourself, I think is critical. And and I always tell this to my kids too, just expect that and know that that's okay. And if you love it, great. And if you don't, you can make choices. And that's like the beauty, I think, of our professional environment right now.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone so much for answering all my questions, albeit a little difficult, but I really appreciate it. And then now we have Samara who's going to ask some of the questions that students have submitted.
Yeah, perfect. So our first question is, how did you navigate the challenge of entering an industry that varied from your academic background or expected path? I know you guys kind of touched on this, but maybe if you could go in maybe a little bit more depth. And then Reka, if you would like to start this time.
Sure. I mean, I think for me, I did have the benefit of the Career Management Center at Kellogg, which is fantastic and brought banks and companies to the table to interview students. I had a variety of offers. Fortunately, I had a consulting offer, I had a banking offer, I had an offer to join a pharma company, and I had an offer to join an insurance company, believe it or not. And so I had, I looked at all 4 of them and ultimately decided to go with investment banking. So I was lucky.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, yeah. I think for me, one thing that really helped me was I kind of built upon some content knowledge I had. So, for example, when I went from medicine to McKinsey, I didn't go in as a general consultant because I had no business background. I didn't go to business school, and I didn't really know anything about business. I came in as we call it APD, an advanced professional degree candidate. Maybe Dan and Sepp, I don't know if you had that, or I can't remember if you had your MBA, but so you come in with you get like a mini MBA over 3 weeks. You're just kind of thrown in, and then you start working on these projects. But I knew, of course, I was a clinician. I knew medicine, so I came in, and then they were deploying me. And then I decided I would only do consulting in the healthcare space. So either large pharma, small biotech, e-healthcare companies, and payer provider practices. So I could leverage my content knowledge while I was learning how to be a strategic management consultant, learning how to run Excel models, build out spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations, communication, all these things I didn't know very well. But again, I had this depth in content that I could leverage. And then similarly, when I went into large biotech at Genentech, I actually had a very good background in immunology. So when I came forward, I was learning how to become a drug developer and how to actually design clinical trials, analyze data, all of these things. But I, again, had immunology, biology, a really good understanding of that. So but as I've taken other roles, and even when I left Bristol Myers Squibb and I became the chief medical officer of Receptos, again, I knew how to do drug development, but then I was learning how to be a C-level executive and how to raise money in the private side and then on the public side. So I've given advice to people I mentor or speak to say, if there's something there that, as you're making a transition into a new role, if there's something there that you can build upon in terms of value you can bring, which is an area of expertise you have, or that you've groomed that you can leverage while you're, learning new skill sets or taking a different functional role, that can be very helpful for you as you're making a career change.
Right, that's super helpful. I know you talked a little bit about transferable skills before too, so that's great to know. Dan, I think is next.
Sure. So I can go next. As I talked about in the kind of the last question, I had this kind of emerging hypothesis when I was leaving graduate school about putting business and healthcare together, and I went to business school. And I guess one of the advantages there is you can test things out in between your first and second year of business school through a summer position. And so I took a summer position at McKinsey, thinking, if the healthcare part works out and I don't like consulting, I can go work for a pharma company. If it turns out my hypothesis of healthcare was wrong, but I like the business side, I can continue in consulting. And if I like both, then I just ended up in the right spot. And so I really like both, and took a job at McKinsey afterwards. I think in terms of skills that I brought into it, I think the things that were kind of respected at that point in time was, yes, I was in business school, but I think they look back to kind of, PhD in physics and what that meant in terms of kind of analytical skills and problem solving. And often in consulting, you're thrown into these situations where you know nothing. And, they're quite intimidating when you get thrown into these. But you develop, with, kind of some analytical and problem solving skills, you can kind of chart a path and start to not solve the problem right away, but understand what are the steps to solve the problem. And then I think the second thing is, while I was at McKinsey, I focused on pharma and medical device clients, and being able to have a scientific background. I think I don't always, even though I felt that at times I was 1 or 2 half-lives away from, when I got my PhD, that scientific background definitely gave credibility with clients and also people within McKinsey, that you can handle not just kind of the analytical type of stuff, but you can actually get into the science and add more value to the clients that way. So it was a little bit about the transitions.
And then Satman, if you'd like to close.
So two thoughts here. I mean, firstly, similar to Sheila, my first quote unquote real job after being in academia was at McKinsey & Company, a large firm that did a lot to train people coming in, particularly those that come from a non-business background like myself. So I was very fortunate to be in a firm that really invested a lot in the people it hired, and sort of, that training was invaluable. And so, to the students on the call today, if you have an opportunity to work for a large organization, I know there's sort of different schools of thought here. Do I want to work for a large bureaucratic company? Do I want to do something more entrepreneurial? Larger companies typically do invest a lot in training the people they hire. So if you have an opportunity to go to a large pharma company, large professional services firm, whatever, you're going to get really good training and meet a lot of really good people who are going to help you and mentor you along the way. So that's sort of my first answer to the question. Was lucky early on to get that opportunity. Then when I became a CEO, I realized there's really no training for that. You're just sort of thrown in, and all of a sudden you're the person that's supposed to solve everybody's problems, right? And you have to do that on the fly. And that was really painful, but invaluable, to just be thrown in the mix and just have to figure it out. But relying on people, one thing you realize, people are very generous with their time if you ask. And particularly in the pharma industry, even cold emails, these days, LinkedIn connections, people will respond and give you their time and help you. And I think I found, sort of as a first-time CEO, to learn on the fly, but then draw on people in my network who could help me and sort of, figure out how to be a good CEO. So how that relates to, again, to the people on the call, like, one option for you, okay, go to a large company and sort of get that sort of training and mentorship. The other is, and I see this a lot now, is there are so many tools now to be an entrepreneur and just go do it. Like, if you have an idea, or if you have a group of people that have a good idea, or you want to just do something, it's a viable path now. It was not maybe 20 years ago, but you can go and bootstrap something and make it happen as an individual entrepreneur. And there are people that will help you. There are investors that will back you if you have a good idea. So that's another way to go at it. And I feel like now it's just so much more well organized than it was, at least on the biotech side, than it was 15 or 20 years ago when I was thinking about what I wanted to do. If I had a great idea coming out of grad school now, with sort of the environment the way it is, I might just say, forget it. I'm not going to go to a well-established firm. I'm just going to try and do this on my own, because you can do that and make that work. So you have a lot of options and things that you can try and do. There's not just one path. And the last thing I'll add, a bit unrelated, but something that Rekha had said earlier, it is an ecosystem, right? So we're here talking about, well, how do I get into pharma? How do I get into biotech? But there are so many companies and organizations in that ecosystem that will get you invaluable training and sort of your foot in the door, whether that's market research firms, consulting firms, contract research organizations, contract manufacturing firms, like all these different players that support what happens in pharma biotech, that are viable routes for you to learn and grow, meet people, get mentorship, and then find your way back into maybe, what you really want to do, if it's to be a CEO in biotech or whatever it might be. So don't think of it as sort of a one-step journey. It's sort of like and everybody sort of alluded to this, it's a winding road. And as long as you're moving forward and learning something, meeting people, you can sort of open your option set. But yeah, I think there's so many different ways to go at it. But for me, yes, partly training, getting lucky at a good firm that invested in that, but then also just having to figure it out and learn on the fly.
Yeah. Hismera, maybe I'll add just one other comment, and then I think I do need to jump. But one thing I did do when I was making a pivot is I actually consulted for a variety of companies, and there were Northwestern Kellogg grads who were involved in those companies. And whether it's for free or for money, I did consult for a few companies, which then gave me a foot in the door, and people got to know my work and got to know me, and that allowed me to actually also get my first industry job. So I just want to mention that.
Yeah, and that was all really valuable advice. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
I'll pass it on to Cassie to close us off.
Thanks, Mira. And thank you so much to our alumni panelists for sharing some time with us today. So many great insights and advice for our current students. We're excited to share this out with students who weren't able to make it today as well through the recording. So thank you so much. Students, please do keep an eye out for follow-up email from Nick with more information, more helpful links, more resources for you all to continue exploring. And as Sepan was just saying, I love this. People are generous with their time if you ask. So let's connect with these alumni panelists on LinkedIn. We're going to share out their LinkedIn profiles with you all in a follow-up so you can stay connected now and into the future. So alumni, thank you again for being here. Students for joining us. We hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
All the best.
Okay.